I've got a minute while baby is sleeping, so I'm going to show you my process for automatic drawings slash easy like sketching. I'm going to be using lidless watercolor pencils. They're from Arteza. Not sponsored, so I don't have a link, but if you look it up, they're a decent brand. Not my favorite brand, but they're a good brand, and I like these watercolor pencils. They're great for sketching, using some watercolor paper. It is, I don't know, it's got a pile of stuff on it. I'm sorry. So we're not going to do that, but it is a hot press watercolor paper because I wanted a smooth texture when I'm sketching. I do like cold press watercolor paper for other applications, but hot press for sketching and for the technique I am going to show you. So here we go. You can see I've got my 3 bunnies ready. I've got 2 up here. I don't know that we're going to get to all of them. It's not going to be a super long video because my goal is that I actually need to really get these done, and it does take longer to do them when I also have to think about video and all of that fun stuff. So, but we're definitely going to get through these bottom 3 bunnies as quick as possible. If you want to know how I divide up my paper and what's going on with all the taping and everything, let me know in the comments. I might do a video on it either way, but I'll be quicker to do it and it'll be higher on my priority list if you let me know that you would like a tutorial on that. Anyway, I've got the yellow widless watercolor pencil. That is what I sketched everything in with a base layer. I always start with my yellow and then I move on to red. And the reason I do that is because yellow is easy to fade to the back with the eye when you're looking at it because it's not very harsh. It's definitely like, it's a lighter color, which means that it's a color when you're painting with it, you have to protect that color, but it's a handy hack when you're sketching with it. And you can see the red starts to define more of what's going on. It's going to take over more of where my eye is going, and that's because I'm starting to add in more concrete shapes. So I sketch in with the yellow. That's why I sometimes like the yellow's a little thicker or a little darker, because sometimes it takes me just a little bit to find the line that I want and the size that I want. And I'm still actually being kind of sketchy in nature with the red. And that's why I said too, I was like, this is usually an automatic drawing technique I use. This is a sketching technique I use. Everything gets its own approach depending on the desired end result. This one is really just meant to be fun and very loose. It's a good exercise. You should not be holding the pencil too tight. Just nice and easy on your hands, which I need to be more cognitive of, and yes. So then I would move on to a blue, but we're just going to go ahead because I do have all of these sketched in. We're going to go ahead and sketch in all of these lower bunnies. I'm not going to do the upper ones because that means I have to change my camera angle, and also I have to flip the orientation of my board because they are oriented the other way, because I'm not a big fan of the landscape. I like portrait style. The taller style is my default favorite. I still paint in landscape or draw in landscape sometimes, even if I'm not feeling it, just as an exercise. I feel like it's good to shake your brain up from what you normally do. Kind of trying to remember. So really what I'm doing is and it's also why I didn't do the yellows, because I looked at reference photos. So if you're curious, yes, I did. I looked at the references. I treated it much the same way that I'm learning to treat a live model in my figure drawing class, and that is to pause, take a breath, you take a moment to really look and analyze the pose and what you want from it. What do you need to convey? And depending on how long you have, depends on how much detail you can get in there. So when you have a shorter time, you know, the goal is not detail. The goal is to still, though, to capture the pose itself. You're still trying to capture what's the essence of what's going on. And when you're trying to kind of do minimalist, even if that's not your normal style, it's a good practice. When you're trying to do, you know, less lines, you do have to take that second to observe your subject matter, to observe the lines, and then you have to ask yourself, what are the most important lines for me to convey what is happening or what, what I want. And that's why you can copy reference photos to practice realism for sure. I'm not knocking that, but I will say in general, I feel like a lot of other artists kind of feel this way too. Reference photos really should be just that. They should be a reference. They should be a basic starting point. And then that's where, as you learn and you start to lean on your own interpretation of what's going on. And it's okay to copy when you start. I mean, it's okay to copy if it's just what you want to do. There are no rules. But if we're talking about learning technical skill and starting to create more of what you want from your own mind, which for me has always been the larger goal, is to convey the images that I have in my head. Because I want to communicate. I want to try at least. And sometimes I'm good with words. And more so, I'm like, I just want to be able to put that picture on the page. So, point being, if you want to practice that, you at some point have to step away from the reference photo. And now we are going to switch over to blue. This is actually my more classic color set because, especially with acrylic paints, and now I'm kind of playing with some oils in general, I've been working with like a 6-color palette. So after red would be kind of like a magenta is a good other one to have in your palette. It's a really nice bright purple, and that's hard to get via just mixing. And then after blue would be a teal again. Another color. You can get a good teal mixing, but it's hard to get a really nice, bright, clear teal, I feel like. And these are all only my opinions based on my own personal experience and what I have just found out by bumping around in the dark on my own. Except for color theory. I did take a color theory class. Highly recommend investing in that if you would like to go somewhere with your art. It is exceptionally worth it. It's not technically necessary. Nothing's technically necessary for art, but I do think it is worth it. And then after the teal is the green, and I will be using a green after this blue. So before I got into the color theory and everything that kind of entailed, this was my go-tos. I had picked out a yellow and a red and a blue, and then I've always had that some sort of green in there. Green is still the trickiest color for me, I think. I don't understand green. I don't know why. Blue I love. Blue I get. Blue and I have been working with together for a while. Red too. Yellow's new, but I feel like I've come to understand yellow. That's actually, I almost want, because that's actually a foot right there, and I can't decide if I need like a little bunny tail back there, but I don't feel like you'd see it. If this is that why? Yeah, I gotta close that line. I was like, why is that funky? And that's what part of this is you're looking at it. What makes sense? And this doesn't quite make sense. We're gonna have to give some toe floof there or something to show that that's the foot, and that's that foot, and that's the leg. There we go. You see how I got darker there because I was less sure of those lines and I wanted to go over them more. And it's funny because it does cause cool colors to happen when I go in and I take water to this and start mixing them around, and then on top of that I'll go in with a marker and define my details again. But it causes fun color mixing, but yeah, you can always tell if I struggled with an area while I was thinking of it, simply because usually it'll be darker. Sometimes there'll be a more concentration of yellow if I really struggled, because that's right at the beginning where I was trying to figure out proportions and where things go. But sometimes, kind of like with the flowers, I guess maybe you can't always tell, because sometimes it is just because I'm like, and I want some blue there. A little more blue. I would say blue tend to have like yellow roughs it in, Red usually defines most everywhere, but then I try to leave more red maybe where I want more shadow, and I try to bring in my blue for shadow effect. These have gotten messy. These are hopefully going to be flower-esque when I'm done, and I say hopefully because I don't know if you know this, but much like writers and their characters, the conduit of said adventures is not always the one in charge, or at least it doesn't feel that way. I remember that a lot back when I was writing. I'd feel like characters just kind of had a life of their own, so they just did whatever they wanted, really. I think you can tell in writing when somebody's forcing a character to do something that seems very almost out of character for them, and you're like, you really wanted to shoehorn in that plot point or whatever it was that they were trying to fix. And they're like, well, then the character does this, and you're like, I don't think the character does. I think you knew that too, because it feels forced. And the same thing with drawing, and that's why I like this exercise, even if maybe loose and simplistic is not normally your style. It's an excellent exercise in fluidity and just roughing it out. I always feel like too when I sketch like this, with anything, even when I'm pushing paint around, sometimes it feels almost like molding. You're molding the colors instead of just putting them on the page via your chosen tool. It really feels like it when I add water to this, because then you start to actually move the colors around. And I actually really love that. So let's see. I think what's going to happen next as I finish roughing this in with the green. Green just kind of is the same as the other. It goes wherever. I like to be limited with my green, but green is also a good final pass defining tool that really helps solidify any of those shapes that were being tricky or not quite going the way that I wanted them to go. We're going to take a small break here because I'm going to take a drink of water. So go drink some water, hydrate yourself, and I'm going to fill in these upper two because I like to do each stage at a time because I have to switch over my materials, and that's something I recommend if you're ever like feeling multiples, which is why this is really nice to set up a bunch of little ones like this. It's good practice. It's more interesting than blocks and color swatches. And it's good to knock several out at once. It just feels good. Anyway, do that. I'll see you back here in just a moment, but for you it's not going to be any time at all because I'm going to clip this together. All right, let's do this again. So, all filled in. You can see I did the top ones. Now I've got my watercolor brush. And this is always the thing I tell people, if you can, you want to spend the money on a watercolor brush because they work really well, and if you take good care of them, which means unlike the abuse that you might give your other brushes, which I definitely do, scrubbing and messing with it on the paper a little too much. My watercolor brushes are always only specifically for watercolor, and you really only need one good brush. I actually have one that's a size down from this, but this one itself is a size, it says 2. I want to say it's a size, yeah, it's a size 12. Like this is not a 2. 2 is small. And the reason it's a size 12 is because it lets you get big strokes, but it also, as you can see, you can use the tip and do little teeny tiny baby strokes. Okay, now all I'm doing is I'm pushing color around and deciding based on the shapes that I want to keep. I'm pushing that. Now be careful. I'm going to come back to that eye, because if I do the eye right now, it can bleed into all this wet paper around it, and I don't actually want to lose that line. Oh, every once in a while, I just rinse my brush to get the color off of it, because I'm not trying to create mud, or even maybe when I swipe, you know, I want a little more color to come off the page if I feel like that's an area that got a little too saturated, which is an option. Also, if any of these areas, to be fair, get too saturated for what you want and you really don't love it, that's what I like about this, is if you take away all the rules you think you have to follow, then you can just tell yourself, you know what, if I hate it as is, I'm just going to paint acrylic over top of it. And I promise you that is an actual solution. You can just change it. Watercolor is like the lightest, the most base thing. That's not saying like it's the most basic art form, because it's certainly not. Watercolor is a tricky thing. So you really do have to be mindful of the amount of water in your brush. So I don't know how to describe to you, without being there to help you, the amount of water you want in your brush for this. Two things to note. This paper is smooth. This is a hot press. What that means is there are no grooves that are catching my paint. So the different angle that you can't really tell because of the camera is that when I was sketching, I had my board more up, because that's a really good angle for sketching. Watercolor, I don't necessarily need it to be flat, and it's not, because I do like an angle, but it's a much lower angle to lean the color back and to help not have too much gravity. But as far as the amount of watercolor, what I can just tell you is what I do. So a hot press watercolor, smooth, the color can go literally wherever I want it, which is why I do like it for this purpose, because as you can see, we're just smushing pigment around on the page, and I'm just letting that trail into lines that I want. And we can, yeah, it's dry. Come back to this eye. And I dip my brush in the water, give it a swish, and that is because I am cleaning the excess pigment off of it. So I dip it into the water, and then I blot it very briefly onto my towel. So it's wet, but it's not soaking. No water's going to drip out of it. It's not loaded up with water. The bristles are just damp. I guess that's the best way I can describe that. Bristles are damp. If you're doing this and you got a lot of water swishing around on the page, you got two options. You can adapt to it and decide you like that. Always an option in art. Happy accidents. Or if you really don't like it and you're like, well, that's not what I wanted though, then just dry off your brush a little bit more. And also, if you've got too much water on the page, with watercolor, the nice thing is you can dry your brush, like really dry it nice, and then come back and pick up that color, and it will come up. And we're just going to keep doing more of that. As you can hear my birds in the background, I just gave them some food and treats though, so hopefully they decide that they might be quiet-ish for right now. And I'll say so far, they're a couple of parakeets. That's what they are. I got two, because can't get just one. They get lonely. I got two. And they chatter, and for the most part, their chatter is good. But every once in a while, especially when they're feeling themselves and they really want a treat, they'll get loud. Which actually prompts my daughter to go over and ask them if they're okay. Basically, she's adorable. Cares a lot. I'm going to say too much, but I don't think she actually cares too much. She still just hasn't been. She's not tired yet. I care a lot. Sometimes I'm tired. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that is actually life. Okay, see that line right there? I don't like that line, so I just go back in and go whoosh. If I really don't like it, I can come back in here, and you can also see I can create a highlight if I want. None of this is obviously very dark on the page. I actually like lighter colors, and I like the quality of just the sketch. May not be super fine art or something you can sell for a lot, or any number of other labels you want to put on it, but you know what I will say about it? It's fun. and relaxing. And so here's your reminder, especially if you're someone that turned something you love into something you are trying to do professionally, however, whatever that means to you. If it's something that you're like, well, now I kind of do this all the time for work or for whatever, breathe and take a moment and do something fun. Because if you're like me, you're constantly trying to get better and to up that skill level, because I still want to get better at conveying other things. I want to be able to draw. I want this all to go faster. That's been the really nice thing in figure drawing, is it is forcing me to go fast. So that's why I wanted to do these. I was like, you know what? I had to practice this with a subject matter I know well, and I actually really adore bunnies. And if you have not seen it, did I do videos on it? I definitely posted pictures on Instagram. I feel like I did a couple of videos. I have videos of drawing rabbits. I like rabbits. Point being, if you like a subject matter and you want to get better at it, just do that straight for like 30 days. Do it for a month. Do it for a couple months if you can keep it up. Like, for as long as you can keep it up, do the same subject over and over again. And I promise you, if you just do that, you will get better. You will start to find little tricks. You will find stylistically, perhaps, like what you want to do. If you're going for realism, I promise you'll get better at observing. Observation, one of the most important skills to an artist. Genuinely, even if you're not observing shape, even if you're not going for realism, then maybe you're just absorbing the values around you, light and darks. Maybe you're absorbing the actual hues and the colors around you. That's my favorite. I always go out in Mother Nature and look for color palettes. I'm obsessed with the clouds. They're so pretty. Sunrise, sunset. I mean, a decent blue day is good too. But also, I really like gray days. I mean, if you can't tell, if you haven't heard from previous videos, I like color. It's my favorite. It's the first thing that I know about, like, well, anything, really. I'm trying to be careful with that, because, like, it's not, like, subjectively important about people, so let's be clear about that. This is important to you, and then it's important to me. I just want to, it's all good. I'm just talking about in general, like, I shop by color. I don't know if anybody else does that. I feel like other people definitely do that. I know I'm not the only one, but that is the category I fall into. I'm like, I know the color of something, the name of something. Oh, good Lord. I don't know. I do not know. Why? Because words are hard. Do you like words? I actually studied English in college. I did end up using it. And I do enjoy words. They are a harder medium for me to understand than visual, though. I'd like to combine visual and words. I wrote a series of poems that actually went with a bunch of acrylic pours, and it told a whole story. It's on my website if you are curious, ShanaeMorris.com. It's the Traveler series. And I wrote poems that went with all the pieces, and I think I want to do more of that. That'd be fun, right? But also because of that, I want to get good at calligraphy. Does anybody else have that? You just got one list on top of another list, and it doesn't feel like you're ever going to get done with that list. Even if I painted every day, morning to night, I think, until the end, I would not finish. Shanae, you can't possibly have that many ideas. I do. I got a backlog, man. Maybe in a couple of years, I'll look back on this and I'll be like, hey, we finished all the things. I'll be like, holy crap, we did. But let's just say I'm not holding my breath for that, because when you find something you love and you find, like, okay, so I love puzzles. That's why I like art, because, like, it's a puzzle. What is wrong with that composition? Why is it? And before you're like, yeah, there's no right or wrong way technically to do art, but there is a right and wrong way depending on the emotion that you want to convey, depending on what you're trying to say with your piece and whether or not it correctly conveyed it. So anyway, that's another thing you can do if you're like, how do I get better as an artist if I'm not going to art school, if you're like me and you're in the boat of, well, I'm at, a stage where I can't really go to art school, starting to feel like the ship has passed on a couple of things. That's okay. Or maybe you're just like, I'm still super young, but also I'm still not going to art school. Fair, there's pros and cons. I can't speak to those because I did not go to art school. I will say pros of being a self-taught artist, you dictate your own curriculum. Cons of being a self-taught artist, you dictate your own curriculum. So if you are going the path of trying to be a self-taught person, well, really in anything, part of the most important thing is self-critique. And that does not mean self-devastation, which I sometimes have a tendency to do. I'm getting better about it. Lies. I'm trying to get better about it. That's more accurate. So I will get better about it. There we go. Action statement. You just got to self-critique in a nice way. Like, so if I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I don't love it. I want something different from it. How do I achieve that? And the answer is, I don't know. In these, the next part is going to be marker. I'm going to stop this video for now because it's getting a little long, so we're going to cut it short. And I will maybe do a follow-up video with the marker rendition on either of these, or maybe I'll show you guys the markers on the top ones, and I'll show you these done because it'll take me a minute. But that's what each stage of this process artistically is what's happening here. So unfortunately, I don't really know how to apply it to your other things. If you're like, well, I'm a music artist and I don't know. Okay, I don't know your thing, and I'm sorry. But if you're an artist, doing something step by step like this will help identify what you need to do better, because as I go through each stage in each of these, and it gives me something different to look at and focus on, which helps because then I go back with a fresh set of eyes on this one, and it gives me enough time to come back to this one and be like, okay. And if you're truly stuck, stop, stare at them. I hang paintings on my wall and just look at them until I know what the problem is, whether it's because it's not colorful enough, or it's not impactful, or it's not, if I can't put my finger, I'm like, I don't love it. Why? And just give yourself time to stare at that and then mess around with paint on the page and start having a conversation with it. And that's where it can be tricky in the early stages, because you're like, well, but what if I ruin it? You know what? Here's the secret. You're going to. You're going to ruin paintings, but you have to, because that's the only way you get better. You have to try. You have to put something on the paper to start having a conversation with yourself, visually, mentally. You have to try. And through that, you will get better, I promise. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Bye.